Hello, my name is Simon Double, and welcome to Inside the Rails, a monthly podcast for horse racing enthusiasts everywhere. And as ever, I'm joined by my co-host, Phil Boyle from BG Racing. Hi, Phil. How are you?
Hi, Simon. Yeah, all good, thanks. And very pleased that we're turning 30 today, although that is just the 30th episode of Inside the Rails. I just do wish I could remember when I turned 30 myself. That was a long time ago. Are you all refreshed from your holiday this month?
Yes, a week away in the heat of Tenerife was just what I needed. And I know the weather in good old Blighty was dreadful, so I think I really did choose a good time to go away. As for being 30, well, that happened to me even further back in time. So moving on. Now, no sooner did we have our first double header in terms of interviewees, Laurie and Philip Branham, than we have our second pair of guests, joint trainers Daniel and Claire Kubler, who will be joining us a little later.
They will be, and some more guests that will be quite positive in terms of syndication, because Daniel and Claire operate syndicates from their yard. And we've obviously seen them at the Great British Racing Syndicate ownership events.
We have indeed spent time with them at the GBR Racecourse Days, and they're not only young trainers, but very pioneering in terms of their scientific approach to training. So really looking forward to finding out about that. Now, I went to Aintree for the very first time, believe it or not on National Day, but on the Thursday. Had a really enjoyable time. I was a guest of one of my owners. Have you ever been, Phil, to Aintree?
Yeah, I have. Not on the Thursday, but on the Friday and on Grand National Day, 2 trips up when we owned Oscar Adara, who was good enough to run at that meeting. And yeah, we got to walk the course on Grand National Day and see the fences up close. Yeah, a couple of really brilliant visits up there.
Well, I think Aintree has really upped its game, hasn't it, during recent years? It's a really good 3-day festival. As for this year's National, first of all, how great was it that it was won by a small syndicate? There were 7 of them, including a 21-year-old student. So that's a great advert for syndication, that's for sure. But look, Phil, I guess we need to touch upon the attempt by a very, and I emphasise very small minority of people who wanted to spoil the occasion by trying to stop the race. Personally, I wasn't at all impressed with some of the media coverage. For example, the BBC website said, and I quote, "At one stage, it looked as though the 175th running of the race might not even take place, as animal rights activists went ahead with their threat to storm the Aintree track." Well, I don't know which Grand National meeting that journalist was at, but to me, it always looked as though the police had things under control. And the race, okay, it was delayed, but it was always going to happen, I thought.
Yeah, I agree with that. But it's sad to see racing thrown into this kind of spotlight again. The sport does so much to reduce the risk to the participants and to ensure our horses are properly cared for. And, you know, it's fair to say that none of us like to see the number of fallers and unseated riders that we had in the race this year.
Of course.
Worst of all, we had a fatality. That upsets everybody. And I know that the authorities will review again to see if more can be done to improve things further. But, you know, racing gives so much pleasure to so many people. And when I'm asked about it, I would always argue strongly that the horses enjoy it as well.
Sure.
They wouldn't do what they do if they didn't enjoy it. It's all very easy to say that they're sort of bullied into it by humans, but that just isn't the case. If a horse doesn't want to jump a fence, it'll soon throw the human over the fence and stay on the side it wants to be. And yeah, there's many areas where animal cruelty exists, and I think these should be the focus of our attention and not horse racing, you know. And on your point about the media, I just don't think it's right that an organisation that represents such a minority view is just given so much airtime to put their views forward.
I couldn't agree more, Phil. I really, really couldn't. Look, when I studied politics and philosophy many moons ago, one of the philosophers we studied was John Stuart Mill, a Victorian philosopher, and he talked about the tyranny of the majority and the importance of protecting minority interests, and quite rightly so. Well, I wonder what J.S. Mill would think of today's world, when at times it appears as though we almost have the tyranny of the minority. Anyway, on to more positive things. It was a great privilege to see Constitution Hill, Shishkin, Ahoy Seigneur, and other great stars on the Thursday when I was at Aintree. And my day was rounded off quite nicely by winning the place spot. Not once, but twice.
Well done on that one. Yes, seeing Shishkin and Constitution Hill must have been a real treat. Elsewhere at the meeting, I thought Jerry Colombe looked very good. And he was beaten by the real whacker at Cheltenham, listeners will probably remember. So that was a big boost for his form as well. And those two could be really nice staying chasers, possible Gold Cup horses for next year. John Bond was pretty imperious again. I love to watch him jump. He really is a great jumper. Sire de Burley proved his Stayers hurdle win was no fluke, but it was quite an unlikely looking success. He looked like he was going to be last rather than first at various stages of the race, but came through to win, and that was quite impressive. And of course, despite all the disruption, we had Correct Rambler travelling beautifully through the National, and I thought he was a very impressive winner.
Well, look, Correct Rambler winning was a lovely story. There's always a lovely story with the National. Not only was it won by a syndicate, but Lucinda Russell was winning her second National, and Derek Fox came back from injury to win his second. Did you have any runners at the meeting, Phil?
No, not this year, Simon. Yeah, the heady days of Oscar Adara are well behind us, unfortunately. Yeah, Dynamic Kate wouldn't be quite at the level required to run at Aintree, unfortunately, but she is coming along well. She should be out racing as soon as we can find a suitable race for her.
Good. And how is Sajwan?
He's fine. He ran again after our last recording session, just before the episode was released. He completely blew the bend at Lingfield. He finished 6th, but he was only 3.5 lengths behind the winner, and our jockey William Carson thought he lost about 3 lengths trying to get Sajwan around the bend into the home straight, so possibly could have finished a bit closer. He was a little bit stiff after that race, which could have been the reason why he didn't take the bend very well. And he's had a session with the chiropractor, and she suggested a couple of weeks without doing any galloping, just to get him used to moving a bit better at slower speeds, in the hope that when he gets back to faster work, he moves in the same way and doesn't need to rely on her services quite as often.
Well, let's hope the chiropractor's magic hands do the trick. What else have you been up to recently?
Been busy. I hosted a box at Lingfield for an accountancy business. They brought 25 clients to the races. That was great fun. It's great to show them behind the scenes. We had a trip to the paddock before one of the races, and before another race we had a trip down to the start to see the horses going into the stalls. And it's easy for us to take these things for granted. We do them quite often, but you'll be aware that this is the kind of feeling that our syndicate shareholders get when they get into ownership and do this stuff for the first time. And it's always great to see someone really enjoying that insider experience.
Absolutely. Now, we've said before, haven't we, that it's about getting inside the inner sanctum, as I like to call it. That's largely what syndicate ownership experience is all about.
Yeah, it is. And it's something that I think people don't always realise they can get access to by joining a syndicate. But switching from BG Racing to Solario Racing, how are your horses getting on?
They're doing okay, thank you. Yeah, the turf flat season is well underway, and we've already had a runner, 3-year-old Tarantino, the needle-phobic Tarantino. He doesn't like the vet coming anywhere near him with any needles. Anyway, he's got plenty of ability, this horse, and he ran a cracker on his seasonal reappearance to finish 6th of 17 in a pretty competitive 7-furlong handicap at Newmarket on Craven Day, which was nice. Many of the runners were fit from the all-weather, whereas we'd been off the track for some 201 days, and we were drawn on what turned out to be the wrong side, as it turned out. So given those factors, and given the fact that Tarantino can get het up before the start, he was pretty well behaved on this occasion. No, it was a more than satisfactory reappearance, and I'm very hopeful for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that sounds good. And it must have been great for your shareholders to be involved as owners at such a big meeting. The Newmarket Craven meeting, obviously one of the big early season highlights.
Absolutely. There were 16 of us there. We all had owners' badges. We all had owners' lunches. Although I must confess, I was invited for an early lunch with the chairman and directors of Newmarket in a royal box, no less. Our sovereign wasn't present, as I believe he's getting ready for quite an important event. Don't know what that might be. But it was good to meet the likes of Chairman William Wyatt and Shadwell Racing Manager Angus Gold. Really, really enjoyable.
It sounds it. I'm not sure you're moving in the same circles as me anymore. On the one hand, I suppose you might meet some future podcast guests, but on the flip side, I'm now starting to get concerned you might decide I'm not important enough for you to be hanging out with in future.
There's no danger of that, Mr. B. My feet are very much on terra firma.
And obviously, we mentioned the Craven meeting is such an important early season festival. I must admit, I'm still in jumps mode with Punchestown still to come. We're recording this on the first day of that festival, so my attention is still very much there. But I know you've been following the flat with interest, so yeah, what's caught your eye?
Yes, really enjoyed the classic trials, the trials for the 1,000 and 2,000 guineas, which are coming up soon. I thought Richard Hannon's Mama's Girl was an impressive winner of the Nell Gwyn at Newmarket, and she's now a 7-1 shot for the 1,000 guineas. That still looks a fair each way price in my book. As for the colts with the 2,000 guineas, well, Chaldine, ridden by Frankie Dettori. Well, I say ridden, he wasn't ridden for very long. He blotted his copybook by unseating poor old Frankie as the stalls opened. However, the impressive winner, Isaac Shelby, trained by Brian Meehan, showed that he's trained on from 2 to 3, and he's heading for the French 2,000 guineas, for which he too is a 7-1 shot. And again, I think that looks fair. Now, last year, listeners may remember that I gave Maljoom a Willie Haggis horse as a horse to follow. And this year, I've got 2 more Willie Haggis horses to keep an eye on. Fairly early on in the season, but have a look at these during the rest of the year. One is Klondike, who made a winning debut as a 3-year-old at Newbury last month. He cost a cool 600,000 as a yearling and looks a smart stayer in the making. I know Willie Haggis is not going to rush this horse, but I think he'll be competing at a decent level throughout the year. The other is a 2-year-old called Relief Rally, the yard's first 2-year-old of the season, who won at Windsor recently on his debut and looks to have a future. Talking of 2-year-olds, I was impressed by Eve Johnson Houghton's debutant juvenile winner Juniper Berries, who bolted up at Bath. And finally, one of Amy Murphy's 3-year-olds, Miss Cantique, who won on her debut at Saint-Cloud in France, beating a Godolphin Hot Pot. So there you go, there's 3 or 4 horses to follow.
Yeah, good stuff. That sounds like a few worth adding to the tracker, and let's hope one or more of them can repeat the successes of Maljoom last season in this season's event. So, yeah, looking forward to the coming weeks on the flat. And speaking of looking forward to things, I know we're about to be joined by Daniel and Claire Kubler. So, yeah, the husband and wife training team, they're based in Upper Lambourne, been establishing themselves as a force to be reckoned with in recent seasons. And, yeah, you mentioned earlier they do take quite a scientific approach to their training of the horses.
They do indeed. And Phil, we're going to find out all about that as they're on the line now. Hi, Daniel and Claire. How are you?
Good, thanks. Great to be here.
Yeah, delighted to be talking to you.
Excellent, excellent. Now, we met at the GBR racecourse days. It was at Ascot, if I recall, when you were slightly ambushed by Phil and myself. I seem to remember Phil softened you up, Daniel, and you agreed to come on inside the rails. And then I came in with a bit of a pincer movement to say we needed you both on. Claire, I know you were a little reluctant early doors, but thank you very much for agreeing to make it a double header. And look, it's great to have people on who run syndicates. It's early in the season, but how are things going? How are the syndicates going?
Yeah, good. I mean, it's, as you say, it's early days, but we've had a couple of runners. So we do 3 different syndicates and at different levels. We've got our Discovery partnership, which is sort of 5% shares, normally around a £20,000 horse. And split up, lots of fun, try and get as many days racing and look for sort of run up to plenty and hopefully go on from there. I think the best filly we've had in that was a filly called Disco, who was kind of a listed level type of filly. Back in the early days when we started training, she was a good filly and we've had plenty of fun. And this year we've had our first runner for our Discovery Syndicate was a filly called Moondial, who won as a 2-year-old. And she made a good start to her season. She was 3rd at Kempton the other day. And then we've got a new syndicate that we've set up the last couple of years called Innovate Racing. So they're sort of 12.5% shares, so slightly bigger shares. Early days for that one, but they've got a nice 3-year-old by Zophony and a sort of quite early looking Harry Angel colt called Crimson Spirit that we're looking forward to. And then we have Capture the Moment, which are normally done in 25% shares, a bit more flexibility on some of those. Depends on the horse. And the flag bearer at the moment for them is Helm Rock, who was, he ran in the Lincoln. He had a very good year last year. He won 3 times and he made his start in the Lincoln.
Excellent, excellent. You must have had a marketing background because you've used that opportunity really well. Well done. And anyway, plenty of options for your owners. That's excellent. Now, your husband and wife, and both of your names are on the training licence. Can I ask, first of all, how did you meet?
We actually met through a friend who's a bloodstock agent now. I was sharing a house with him for a year, and he always had people around for dinner all the time. He was very sociable.
Okay.
Dan was.
I was conned.
I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure that's not true.
I turned up at Ed's place, Ed Sackville, and on the promise that there'd be some dinner and some wine, and I'd go around there occasionally and normally crash the night there because it was about 25 minutes. I was working with Roger Charlton at the time, so it was about 25 minutes away, so you could sort of get up in the morning and get into work, no problem. And there was this pretty girl in the corner.
He'd slaved away at the
cooking dinner and made a fantastic lasagna. And Ed lives on Hungerford High Street, so it was good anyway. There was an off license across the road, and we sort of finished a bottle of wine, and we decided to go across and get another one, and the rest is history, as they say. But I got conned into thinking Claire was a wonderful chef.
Right. Swiftly moving on. Look, science plays a big part in the way you train racehorses at Sarson's Farm in Upper Lambourne, and we'll come on to that shortly. You both have scientific backgrounds. Claire, you did a degree in natural sciences at Cambridge, but then became an accountant. So how and when did you move into racing? What's the Claire Kubler story?
I've been really lucky. I was brought up at home, which is a little stud farm. And mum and dad kind of got into horse racing and got hooked when I was very young. And then they went into breeding. So all my early years, I was surrounded by racehorses, and I loved them. I'm super competitive as well. I love sport at school and a lot of county level stuff. Always like academically, teachers push you to go to university. So I went and did science. I love science. Physiology is what I specialised in my final year. And actually published a paper on muscle cells. I joint published a paper, which was an amazing thing to do. And I didn't feel ready to go straight into racing. I think I wanted to understand business a bit more. So my friends were like, look, if you don't want to go into banking, then go for accounting. It's really good, sound knowledge for the rest of your career. So I did. I applied to PricewaterhouseCoopers, got the job. And yes, qualified as an accountant with them, spent my time in audit and forensics and loved it. I love the forensics, lots of variety, lots of really getting to know a business inside out very quickly. Very interesting. But then once I qualified, I kind of knew I had to come into racing and I wanted to work from the ground up really. So it felt like the right time.
Excellent. What an interesting path into the industry. And Daniel, same question to you. What's been your path into racing?
So I've come from a completely non-horse background. Like Claire, I was always very competitive at school and very good at, enjoyed a lot of sport and did a lot of sport. And unfortunately, my father passed away when I was in my last year at school. And I suppose it made me take stock and I had a place at university going to study international relations, but I decided to go travelling and just think about things a little bit. And I kind of came to the realisation that you've got to do something you love if you're going to work for a long time in your life. So if you're doing something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I was kind of backpacking around Australia, and I ended up working for a guy backing young horses and riding young horses and doing a lot of that. And he sort of said to me one day, he's like, look, if you really love working with horses and what you want to do, you need to go down, go and have a look at racing. And he kind of steered me that way. He trained on a very small level for a brief time. And he was like, look, that's how you can really make a living with horses. And I'd always followed racing a little bit, but never been like, this is going to be, my life. I couldn't see how I could ever get into the world, as it were. So I came back from Australia and I went to the Northern Racing College and I did the sort of foundation course there, which was an interesting experience. And then went and worked for Tom George as a jumps trainer. I'm quite tall, so that kind of got me going in the basics. And I got really hooked into racing. And I think one of the things I did when I came back from Australia is I read Martin Pipe's autobiography, and I was like, this is I get this. This is kind of like the training side of it always really fascinated me. And I'd always been into sport and the whole, training for athletic, stuff had always interested me. So I just really wanted to develop that. And I was hooked then. And I then decided to do a degree at the Royal Agricultural College which was sort of equine and agricultural business management, and quite a lot of science in it. And I think one of the strengths having come from outside of racing is you look at it and there's a lot of things are done the way they've always been done because that's the way you do them. And I think you've got to think innovatively if you want to move forward and compete.
Both very interesting paths, which obviously came together. Now, I mentioned that you're joint trainers. How does the division of labour work between you?
I think we kind of naturally fell into different roles, to be honest. Obviously, I pick up the accounting side of things. But yeah, I think the main thing is on a Sunday we sit down together and there's no one kind of around on a Sunday. It's a much quieter day. And that's when we really plan for the next week ahead. And, we often have debates about, and that can happen any time of day. I think that's the joys of being husband and wife, or maybe not sometimes. But, we'll have these debates at any time of day about what, new approaches. Dan's very good at getting out and researching. So we have often those kind of discussions going, there's this research done in Australia, how can that be applied to what we do? And then the big thing, race planning as well. It's very much we do that together and in partnership with owners. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think, training requires so many different skill sets and there's so many different elements to it. And, being able to work together and help, it's kind of helping each other along and where Claire's got strength. And I've got a weakness, Claire's able to pick that up, but it's also just bouncing ideas off each other constantly. And it sort of means that I think with every horse, there's always okay, I do this and Claire do this, and we'll have a discussion and you hopefully get to the best solution, and you're challenged on your thought process to really think it through logically, and hopefully that delivers really good results for our owners ultimately, which is, what it's about.
Good stuff. Yeah. I'm changing the subject a little bit, although it's something you've alluded to. I'm quite interested in some of the science that you guys use in your training. I will caveat that by saying I know nothing about this stuff at all. So when I mention things like speed genes, stride patterns and biobandings, that's because I've read that they're tools that you use as opposed to me knowing anything about them. So let's start with speed genes. Can you tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, I think when I came into racing as well, it was quite noticeable, as Dan said earlier, things are done the way they've always been done. So it was nice to bring in the scientific mindset to try and just challenge things and search for new things that are out there. As I said, Dan's pretty good at that. Always horsemanship is number one, without doubt. But onto the speed gene testing. It's actually something my dad started doing with foals that he'd bred. And there's a whole plethora of genetic testing you can do now actually with this company, but we actually found the muscle gene was quite reliable in the data it produced. So you basically have what you call the speed gene. You have fast twitch muscle and slow twitch muscles, which is the same as humans. Fast twitch is obviously your speed, and slow twitch for more staying types. They found a gene, so the C gene actually contributes towards the fast twitch, and T genes contribute towards the slow twitch. You'll always get one gene from your mum and one gene from your dad. So it's that combination. So if you are a CC, then you're more than likely to be a 5 furlong up to 8 furlongs. If you're a CT, you're probably going to be a mile up to maybe 12 furlongs. And if you're a TT, you're going to be the much more staying types. So I'd imagine quite a lot of jumpers would be TT. So it's just really helpful. We do that on our yearlings to give us a good guide as to where they're going to likely land in terms of trip.
That does sound really, really interesting and very useful. And what about the stride patterns and bio banding? Can you tell us a bit about that?
So just start with the stride pattern. So again, very simply, there's 2 ways you can go faster. You can take longer strides, so you cover more ground with each step. So if you're taking the same number of steps, or you can take more steps. So we call that stride length and then cadence. But then typically horses fit a pattern related to the distance that they'll be most effective at running over. So again, your sprinters, they have what we call a high cadence and a relatively shorter stride. And then your more staying types will have a lower cadence, so a slower turnover, but relatively longer strides. So that would be your sort of typical pattern. Of course, there's variations. But so by analysing the stride patterns of your horse, again, you're looking at what their optimum trip might be, and then if you're combining that again with the data that you're getting from the gene test, you can really start to sort of pinpoint, okay, why is this horse working out? And okay, this horse has got you're looking to try and refine the trip and adjust the trip based on that kind of information. And then stride length is an indicator of ability. Tends to be horses with longer strides have more ability, but so 2 5-furlong sprinters with a similar cadence, the one with the longer stride is going to probably be the better horse, because it's taking for the same number of steps per second, it's taking longer strides, so it's going to cover more ground every second. And likewise with stayers, the ones that take the longer strides tend to be the better horses. But obviously, stayers generally take longer strides than sprinters. So just because a horse has got a stride length of a certain distance, without knowing what its best distance is, it doesn't really give you complete indications as to its potential ability.
Yeah, it makes sense. And what about biobanding?
So biobanding is a sort of concept, really, and I suppose it's something that horsemen and women have always done. In that, the kind of, particularly on the flat, you get sent, your yearlings and your 2-year-olds, and you look at some and you would call them backwards, or this is a more forward, precocious type. But it's a more, I suppose, analytical way of measuring it and thinking about it. And there's various tools that we can use to assess a horse's maturity. Again, the genome test can give us some kind of indication as to those CC horses are generally faster maturing types than the TT horses, which are our more staying types. But also, you can look at the growth plates. So as a horse physically matures, the growth plates close up in a particular order. So we look at the knee growth plates, which is the same as the growth plates that they look at in human wrists. And really interesting. I did a post on Twitter about this, and a guy who works at the University of Bath, who's kind of one of the leaders in, physiology and young athletes and youth athletics. He sort of got in touch and said, "Oh yeah, we do this kind of stuff, but we're not allowed to just take X-rays of kids' wrists unless there's a medical reason, and working out their maturity isn't considered a medical reason, so they have to use slightly other tools." So actually, it's a sort of a case where horse racing is almost a step ahead of kind of human athletics in terms of that kind of thing. And he does a lot of work with football academies, but basically biobanding is then you're training by the actual biological maturity of the animal or the human, if you're talking about football players or whatever, rather than, okay, it was born on the 1st of January, so therefore it's more mature than one that's born on the 1st of April. You can appreciate, hopefully, that if we take 2 15-year-olds, one might be kind of actually he's got the kind of biological makeup of a 13-year-old, and another one's been shaving for 2 years and got the biological makeup of a 17-year-old. And if we put them in an under-15s football match, the 17-year-old's going to look a lot better, be a lot stronger, and all the rest of it. But actually, probably, if we're looking for the long term, the one with the body of the 13-year-old is probably actually the more talented player, because he's able to compete with that 17-year-old body type, and he's going to at some point probably catch up and surpass it. So we have to think about that with horses when we're looking at them. And if we've got a feeling, and then there's also a huge advantage in terms of pushing very immature athletes too much isn't beneficial for them, and can be detrimental. So it's about injury avoidance. And again, by taking this kind of more biobanded approach. So what they do in a lot of the football academies is they bioband them and they train them by where they are in their sort of biological development, rather than all the 13-year-olds are together and all the 15-year-olds together. And they found they've massively reduced the amount of injuries that they're getting.
I think they said reduced it from 75%.
Yeah.
Wow.
So again, by taking that approach with racehorses, it can only be beneficial, particularly with the young flat horses, where you are dealing with what essentially are quite at times immature athletes, and just giving them that bit of time and space and developing them at a rate that suits their body is really beneficial.
This is really fascinating stuff, all of this science. And I know that we're all of us around this table, as it were, really concerned about equine welfare. And it's great that the things that you're using, the tools you're using, things like biobanding, are obviously helping to reduce injuries. That'll be welcomed by everybody. Now, we're drawing towards the end of our interview, which is a great shame, but we do like to finish with a question which we ask all of our guests. If you could change 3 things in British racing for the good of British racing, what would they be?
I think we've got a great sport, and I just love the media that cover it to be a bit more enthusiastic, a bit more positive about the sport and everything that goes on, and tell the stories and cover it with some enthusiasm. Because I think at times it can be a bit miserable watching it, and it's like every horse there's a story, every race is interesting, it can be made interesting, it can be presented in a coverage way. Focus on all the positives, not just always on all the negatives. There's so many good things that go on in the sport, and it's a great sport and it's fascinating. And let's just keep telling that story. And the Racing Post, be more positive, tell more positive stories. Don't always be so critical of everything, and to spread the love a little bit. Don't just always put Paul Nicholls on. And because we're flat, I'll use jump example, but don't always put Paul Nicholls and Nicky Henderson on the front page. There's loads of other stuff going on, and same with the racing channels. They always want to cover the same handful of people. There's so much diversity in the sport, and it's a sport that people can really get involved in. There's not many sports where, as an owner, you can come in and actually have some sort of say in what goes on with the horses and get involved. Okay, outright ownership for one person is not a cheap thing, but it's far more accessible than owning a football club. That would be my number one.
Well, it's a very good starting point, and a second one.
My number 2 would probably be on the people development side. I think there have been great initiatives for people who work in racing yards and studs, but just keeping that momentum, keep pushing forward to get more opportunities to open doors for people. The Lambourne Open Day, there's such fantastic opportunities as well to get out there and showcase what we do and recruit people into the industry going forwards. National Racehorse Week, again, another great initiative. But just keep that momentum on training and development. It is a fantastic industry. Everyone who's in it, they love the horse, and we all want to do the best that we can.
And another excellent improvement or suggestion. And do you, between you, have a third one?
Well, I think prize money we'd all like a bit more, and I think I think so many of racing's challenges and the issues that where we do get a bit down about things come down to the way the sport's structured in terms of prize money, and there's lots of fiddling around the edges, but fundamentally, better prize money would lead to better welfare for horses. It would lead to better conditions for staff. When people talk about, we need to do things to change the race program to get better field sizes and all the rest of it. Well, if there was more prize money, there'd be more horses racing for it. It's really simple. And I think there's a lot of businesses that, and everyone has a right to make a living and to make money out of what they do. And nobody's saying that race courses shouldn't be run for, to make profits for their shareholders and all the rest of it. But I do think there's an imbalance of power because of the way things are structured. And the way to really redress that is, by putting more into the sport and creating better prize money, you create the desire to own horses and people to keep horses racing for a bit longer. Trainers can charge a bit more, in terms of training fees, and pay their staff a bit more, because the owner's getting a better return on, when they do have a bit of success. And I don't think anybody goes into racehorse ownership wanting to think that there's a get rich quick scheme. I think what's disappointing is when you have a pretty good horse and you're still falling well short of making it, getting the returns. I think that frustrates people. So I think it's something that, working on, and hopefully the sport can find answers, but that would really improve the sport, I think, and improve the quality of what we're putting out there on a day-to-day basis.
Well, this is our 30th podcast, and virtually every single guest has mentioned prize money. But interestingly, you mentioned it as the third one, and I thought your first two between you were very, very interesting. Perhaps just before you go, could you give us 2 or 3 horses for our listeners to follow this flat season?
An obvious one for me is Deceiver, 3-year-old by Crackman. Lovely big horse. Just needed time last year. He's probably 16.3, is that big. He'll just keep progressing as the year goes on. He won a few weeks ago at Kempton, and Ross Orion, when he jumped off, just said, look, this horse is going to be so much better at the end of the year. Hopefully lots more to come from him. And even as Mark, who rides him regularly at home, said, next year, he's even going to be stronger and better again. So lots to look forward to.
He's a very exciting 3-year-old, probably run at Haydock on Saturday, so keep an eye out for. And then we've got looking in the 3-year-old division, a horse called Forest Demon, who won as a 2-year-old last year, and he's had his first run the other day on soft ground, but he's kind of ready to go, and he looks like he's got a little bit in hand. It should be an exciting horse to follow. And then we've got an exciting older horse, a new horse that we picked up at the Horses from Training sale last year, called Astro King, and he's being aimed at the Hunt Cup. He's rated 99. He had very good form for St Michael Stout. So yeah, if we can keep that up, he should give his owners plenty of fun. And with the Horses in Training, we've done well. We bought a horse last year called Percy's Lad, who ended up running in the Hunt Cup, but we bought him for 30,000, which is not a huge outlay. And he won 3 times last year and broke a track record at Chester. So if we can get a little bit, we probably won't get as much improvement from Astro King. If we do, we've probably got a Group 1 horse on our hands. But if we can get a little bit of improvement, we can get him from going from being 3rd and 4th in the Hunt Cup to winning it. So that's a very exciting project that we've got on the go with some of our Capture the Moment owners.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you for sharing that and giving us some horses for our listeners to follow. And thank you for giving us an insight into how you train, the two of you. It really is fascinating stuff. And Phil and I would just like to wish you all the very best for the rest of the season. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us on.
Well, 2 fascinating guests, Phil. I don't really know why Claire was a bit reluctant to come on. I thought she seemed to quite enjoy it. And all that stuff about the science was brilliant. Speed genes. So come on, what are you? Are you a CC, a CT or a TT? You a sprinter or a stayer?
I think I'd be one that they didn't come up with. Somebody that's very slow with no stamina. I think that's my problem. It was a great interview though, and I was fascinated by all the science stuff. Let's look forward, though, rather than back. I know I say this at the end of every podcast, but we've got another podcast coming out next month, and we'd like to continue to increase our listeners. So we'd like to, let everybody know how accessible syndicate ownership is and how brilliant an experience it can be. And the more listeners we've got, the more people we get to tell that to. So if anybody that's listening to this can help us to make Inside the Rails bigger and better by following the podcast or telling your racing friends about us, that would be brilliant. And if you're looking to get into racehorse ownership, please check out the GB Racing in the Paddock website. You can search for syndicates that fit your location and budget there. And obviously all members of the Racehorse Syndicates Association are flagged up on there, and they comply with the syndicate's code of conduct, so you can be certain that you're going to get a good experience there. There's a list of them also on the RSA website as well. Or alternatively, if you don't want to do any of that, you can get in touch with us using the contact details in the show notes or through our Twitter feed, which is @InsideTheRails. We'll always be happy to help.
Well, that just leaves me to thank co-host Phil Boyle from BG Racing, our very special guests Daniel and Claire Kubler, producer Callum Ronan from Callum Ronan Creative, and of course, you, the listeners. The Grand National yet again hit the headlines, but the protesters failed to stop the race. The winner was trained in Scotland for just the 3rd time ever, and it was owned by a 7-strong syndicate. This is Simon Double from Solario Racing saying, thank you for listening to Inside the Rails, and until next time, goodbye.